Good morning. Good morning, everybody. We are going to start the next panel about the Caribbean experience. So, thank you. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Julio Rivas, and I'll be moderating this panel. I don't know you, but since I have kids, the year really starts in September. To be more precise, first day of school is New Year for me. So there is no better way to start the year than with this forum, with this panel, and with these guests. So we have Rosemarie Antoine, Minister Green, and Dr. Thompson, and we'll go right away, if you don't mind. So let's start with Professor Antoine. I'm curious, your commission is the Marijuana Commission.
Yes.
Why marijuana, why not cannabis?
Good question. Well, actually, the heads of government created the commission, and I think they just went with the sort of the localized name. But as soon as we started our consultations, because we did regional consultations all over the Caribbean, we were roundly chastised, and I think with good cause. So in our report, we were very careful to put cannabis stroke marijuana, because we do know the negative connotations of marijuana, but we had no choice in the matter, at least the commission members.
So it was a popular choice. So exactly a year ago, your commission presented the first report on cannabis, marijuana for the region. And I believe it's the first one of this nature produced for a multinational region. Yes. So can you tell us a little bit about the process and the conclusions?
Okay, so the process was both interrogating via research, and we were a multifaceted commission. So we had doctors, we had scientists working in the area, we had social workers, we had a representative from the church, believe it or not, and myself, the lawyer, legal academic. And an important part of it was also the consultations I mentioned. So we traveled across the Caribbean and held two types of consultations. One would have been focused stakeholders, persons who have been lobbying and working in the area, and then the general public, we had those. And so we got a lot of information. We also had polls conducted and things like that, whatever had been, because we also linked up with national commissions, because when the process started, the idea was to have each country have a national commission which could feed into it. So a lot of work for about 2 years, and then the report was made. The main conclusions in a nutshell, there was huge consensus that there should be legal reform throughout the Caribbean, and we agreed with that. In fact, one could say there's a revolution, or perhaps I should say a rebirth or reawakening, since cannabis has always been part of the social psyche of the Caribbean. Very important, great social significance. Our approach was to say that we felt that there should be reform, and we would emphasize the public health and human rights rationales of it. We gave some leeway in terms of recommending the type of regulations. And as you just heard in the talk before us, it's very difficult to get unanimity. So we don't expect that every country will have the same approach, and we felt that was reasonable. But certainly there should be, at minimum, the report says, decriminalization. That was very important. We did not put forward the view, and I know that this workshop, this conference is focusing on medical cannabis, that medical cannabis should be the focus. We feel it's necessary but not sufficient. So a more overall perspective, but thinking about the public health, thinking about the very compelling social justice issues, some of which you heard a little bit before, the incarceration, we know about it, the criminality and all of that, which is very big in the Caribbean, very big, and which also acquires not just class but race barriers. So that is important for the decriminalization and the human rights perspective as well. And since then, we've seen but I guess we'll get there. But the report was adopted, agreed to, and we've seen a lot of movement in terms of the various countries.
Minister Green, your department oversees cannabis issues in Jamaica through the Cannabis Licensing Authority that was established in 2015.
Yes.
So what is the situation right now after 4 years with this framework?
Well, so in 2015, we made amendment to what we call our Dangerous Drugs Act. And I would say we took a three-pronged approach. One, we looked at the justice issues. So we decriminalized the possession of small quantities of cannabis, less than 2 ounces. And we also went the route of making it mandatory that you can expunge your record if you were convicted for less than 2 ounces of cannabis. So that's the justice-based approach. We also went the approach of human rights and a religious-based approach. So in Jamaica, we have the Rastafarian culture, of which cannabis has always been a big part of their faith and their religion. In fact, they treat it as a sacrament. So in our law, we made special provisions for where cannabis is used as a sacrament, and that is completely legal. And then we went the health-based approach, the medicinal cannabis approach, with the view of trying to establish a viable medicinal cannabis industry. Hence, the Cannabis Licensing Authority came about, and a slew of regulations in relation to how you could establish a viable industry. One, clearly we had to put a lot of focus on monitoring, enforcement, security provisions, ensuring that there's no inversion, diversion. We have a history and a strong culture of growing, not only growing cannabis, but growing the best in the world. And as such, a lot of attention was placed to ensure that we were saying to our international communities, and you would have heard in the presentation before why it was important, that we're really looking at establishing a viable medicinal marijuana industry. Since that time, it took us a little time, I would say. One, getting the agency together, as you know how government works, getting the agency populated, getting the right people. Now we are at 50 licenses that we have issued in Jamaica. We have 11 retail outlets, we have dispensaries, we have herb houses, we have a mixed model of dispensaries and herb houses. All of it is a medicinal industry, so you have to have a doctor where you go in, you get a prescription, and then you can legally purchase. And we do have over 120 conditional licenses. We do have a two-stepped approach in relation to the granting of a license. One, you would have to submit all your documentation, identify whether you want to be a cultivator, whether you want to operate a dispensary. You have to submit information in relation to your club, your company, your directors. We would do our security checks, which probably takes up the biggest portion of time, and then you may get a conditional approval once everything checks out, and then you put in the infrastructure, yes? And then that is checked, and once that is fine, then you get your approval and you can trade. So thus far, I would say definitely over the last year, we have seen a significant increase. We've opened, since I have been at the ministry, 3-4 new dispensaries since the start of 2019. So there is a good momentum. Our focus right now is, one, I would say quite frankly, we probably went to the extreme in relation to regulations when we started. And I think that was to send a very clear signal what we were doing. We're now doing a review of our regulations to see if we can reduce some of the bureaucracy. I really want to reach to a stage where an application for a license should take a maximum 6 months. We're now at 9 months, and it can go a little bit further. But we're trying to get it down to 6 months. So we're at this stage now where 4 years in, I think we've seen enough to see, one, what works. Oftentimes regulations are done, sometimes not remembering that cannabis is an agricultural crop, and how you treat with it has to be from an agricultural base. And I think with that learning now, we're now able to reformulate and to ensure that we're, one, getting the most out of the crop, 2, that we're really harnessing the medicinal potential, and then 3, which we'll speak about a bit much more, that we're able to share that potential with the world.
And Professor Thompson, you actually, I think that just a few weeks ago, awarded the first licenses in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Are you learning from the experience of Jamaica and other countries in the region?
I think we're learning from the experiences of Europe, the experience of Jamaica, but more in particular, the experiences of Canada. And we've had an experience similar to that of Jamaica. I think they call St. Vincent the Ganja Island of the South. And we defer to Jamaica as regards who has the best. But I think that some people may question that. The thing is, though, that it's not really about that issue. You know, we were also seeing a number of other issues. We have volcanic island, and we were seeing a lot of deforestation, environmental degradation, siltation, and criminalization of our youth. Matter of fact, in the 90s, the United States came in after our signature to the third convention on illicit trafficking. And for 3 years running, they came in with helicopters and so forth. And we realized that that process wasn't working. And so St. Vincent and the Grenadines, too, had to go through the process of legalization. We did so last year, in December, medicinal cannabis, and we also went through a process of decriminalization. But we did a few different things. First of all, we set up the authority not under the Ministry of Health, but under the Ministry of Agriculture, so as to make sure cultivation goes along good agricultural and collection practices. We also, I don't know why they installed me as a medical doctor as the CEO, but more importantly, we started looking at some critical things, banking compliance. And I must tell you that today we have a relationship with one of the major banks on a street nearby, on the next street, and we now have a full process by which finances and so we think we've solved that problem of banking, because we showed them that the regulatory process that we had put in place was quite robust and so forth, and sufficient for them to grant us that. The second thing is that we realized we needed a seed-to-sale system. And I think very shortly, I think, again, Canadian experience, one of the leading seed-to-sale companies in Canada, we're about probably to establish a relationship with them, a partnership in relation to making sure that that aspect goes right. But we have had traditional cultivators, and we've also realized that the process of education is so important. I think the previous speaker pointed to that. We've had a series of public consultations on radio, in the nooks and the crannies of St. Vincent and Grenadines. And I think that we are going to continue that particular process so as to make sure that people understand. The traditional cultivators, they were right. The Rastafari was saying that these things had medical benefits, and I practiced as a medical doctor in the United States for a few decades. And as an infectious disease specialist, my HIV patients and so forth that I had were losing weight and so on. I saw the benefit of cannabis. And it was only until we started to understand why persons were able to benefit. And I think this message, that educational process, along with some of the potential harms, has to be really projected. So St. Vincent and Grenadines, we have learned from our own collective experience, from the experience of other countries in the Caribbean, including Jamaica. And we've also learned a lot from Canada. I was here just a matter of a couple of weeks ago, taking a tour of Canada. We also went down to the United States, New York. It's a learning experience, and shaping and balancing things so that you're able to get it right. We feel that you have to get it right. There's not a lot of opportunity in order to make mistakes in this particular field. And we are looking to progress with that program.
There is something that the three of you have mentioned, and I think that it's important to highlight that you mentioned social justice as one of the motivators of the whole process. However, the markets don't see it like that. It's about profit, making money. It's a big market. So how do you balance both?
I'm glad you raised that because I think there's a paradox today. I mean, we've seen a paradigm shift toward, overnight it seems, in medical marijuana. And I know there are many persons out there, I see one or two in this audience, who are very concerned that some or other, while we are raging ahead with the medical marijuana industry, sure, no problem, big business and so on, in some ways it can undermine the trust toward some of these social justice imperatives, which is why I said at CARICOM, we said that medical marijuana is not sufficient. And particularly in small, vulnerable countries like in the Caribbean, there's a great danger that you have big businesses coming in and every people gets used into the money, and we leave that behind. The small farmers are left behind. The person, and they have been over many years persecuted, thrown in jail, many young people, usually poor people, many, all of these issues have been happening. In Trinidad, for example, you could get 40 years in jail for 1.5 grams of marijuana. So if you're just focusing on the medical marijuana industry, which we do need and which we want to have, and you forget these other imperatives, then I think you have not really done what you set out to do, and which for many years, many persons across the world are trying to do. So I am very concerned about that. That's a big issue. And I should mention, and this question was asked earlier on, actually the courts have weighed in already on these issues. In fact, they've done it in Canada, in Ireland, they've done it in the States, and very recently in the Caribbean, in a case from, is it Antigua or St. Kitts? Now I'm getting confused. But there was a case that actually relied on, we have 14 countries in the Caribbean, the independent Caribbean, actually relied on the report and gave a judgment in the spirit of fundamental human rights. And I don't think it's really a right to have a substance. It has to do with privacy, it has to do with human dignity, and also it has to do with the right to health, which today we recognize, social and economic social rights. That is now recognized. So that is not going to go away. The courts are going to continue. So I think there are two issues there, there are these rights, but there is also the need for a state, and we have two representatives here from two of the leading countries in this area, to try to have that balance. So the farmers have to be in, the persons who have been, injustices have been done, they have to be taken into consideration. So yes, I think that's where we are at this moment.
So, Minister Green, so I think that one of the concerns have been precisely integrating the traditional farmers in the system. How are you solving that problem?
Yeah, I agree that balance is critical, and I outlined the approach, and it's very funny. So our bill was piloted by the Minister of Justice, but the CLA was set up under the Ministry of Industry and Commerce. So, we started on that road towards balancing. I think the ultimate balance will be getting our traditional growers to participate, once they're willing, in the medicinal marijuana industry. We have started what we call an alternative development program, right? And what that means is, one, we've recognized that the regulations as put out may really exclude some of the traditional growers based on the upfront resources that you need to start cultivation. And quite frankly, for example, our regulations call for a secured area that has to be secured by fencing. It calls for security cameras, things of that nature, which you would understand the small traditional farmers may not have adequate resources to get that. So we've started a program that we're piloting now, actually started with one of our traditional communities. So we have a community called the Maroons, which are the first free blacks in our country. Jamaica was colonized, had slavery. We had a group of people who ran away and nobody could get them back. And despite wars, the British ended up signing a treaty with them. So they established a free area in the country. And they have been growing marijuana from that time until now, they will tell you. So we've actually started our first project, and what we've done, we have develop a new set of rules for our AD program. We have gone in, we've identified the traditional growers, we have identified the plots, we have lowered the fencing requirements, we have gone in and paired them with buyers because we do have a closed loop system. We have actually a Canadian investor who is on board, who is working with us as the government to work with them in terms of the quality of the marijuana. Clearly, it's very important in relation to the standards that they grow by, the drying house. So we've started that process. Thus far, we're seeing good results. Clearly, it does take interventions in relation to training, how they used to grow, how they're now called upon to grow. It does take a social justice approach. You have some of them who have been convicted of marijuana-related offenses. For our AD program, that is not a bar to participate. Because clearly, if you were to use that as a bar, you probably would not have anybody who could participate because it used to be illegal. So we've started that, and we're calling it a pilot project, which we will then assess and look to move into other communities. One of the good things is that communities have been reaching out. So I've had literal communities who've come to my office, farmers who've come in. I met with about 30 of them, with their member of parliament, who have sat and said, listen, we want to come into this medicinal marijuana industry. Tell me how to do it. So now what we're doing is hand-holding to get them to transition into that.
You can imagine those meetings and they telling you, we were right all this time.
Well,
you were after us, and now...
It's something that we one, quite frankly, just have to admit. And especially to Rastafarians, who one, again, have taken a religious approach, but took a very strong medicinal approach. If you listen to our reggae music, especially that has come from our Rastafarian practitioners, they've been saying that ganja is the healing of the nation from a very long time. Peter Tosh was calling for legalization from the 60s and 70s. So absolutely they have been saying, listen, you're just catching up, right? Now it is to say, how can we take the anecdotal things that they know, that they used to tell us, as me growing up in rural Jamaica, that if you have asthma, you should drink some ganja tea. How can we take that verified and now put it into products that can save lives? Again, this is the sort of relationship that we think is very, very important.
And for you, Professor Thompson, you were mentioning your experience as a practitioner.
Yeah.
I guess that had to be frustrating, knowing for years what you were seeing and not being able to put that in place.
It's a remarkable experience. But I want to touch on some things we said. You see, we took an approach that we were going to create a brand new act. And we also had another act which was an amnesty act, which brought these traditional cultivators in. And we had several workshops. There were several investors from Canada who came down to talk to the traditional cultivators about the method of doing it. And it was amazing because the investors learned a lot from the traditional cultivators on the climatic issues, the peculiar species and so that might be there. And of course, the traditional cultivators, they too learned from the various master growers and so forth, with respect to how they could increase their yield. So we've created in our legislation that there has to be a bonding and a relationship between the two. Any particular investor has to have a number of traditional cultivators linked with them. And we have been successful in being able to forge what we consider as a strategic compact, and that's within a legal framework. As a matter of fact, United Nations has been promoting over the years what this thing is, alternative livelihood initiative. A general, trying to get persons who are involved in this into fishing or tourism. We call that GALI. GALI, a General Alternative Livelihood Initiative. And with the new cannabis, we have said, look, why don't we have CALI, Cannabis Alternative Livelihood Initiatives? And so we've launched that particular program as part of a significant but alternative livelihood within the concept of medicinal cannabis. So we expect that buy-in has come all around, and we hope that we can sustain it in terms of from the license fees and so that we collect from issuing licenses. We are hoping to put a certain portion of that into ensuring that the traditional cultivators, the people who've been there for 50, 60 years, crying in the wilderness, if you want to put it that way, that they are part of this particular process. And that is what we believe has been social justice. I mean, what you mentioned about my own experience as a physician, it just amazes me that when I first realized that there was this endocannabinoid, I'm an immunologist, an infectious disease specialist. It was only in 1995 I was attending a lecture in New York. And here was this presentation about this new system in the body that I should have known about, but I didn't know. I was never taught about this in medical school. The research had always been about what's bad about cannabis. And as we go forward in terms of learning, not just about the cannabinoids and the terpenes, but the flavonoids and how that entourage effect is able to get, I think that we have a real opportunity to significantly reduce the cost of healthcare, which in some respect, but at the same time, look at a number of other issues. I mean, I wrote tons of prescriptions for synthetic opioids. I'm guilty. And to see now today you're able to use, cannabis as a means of getting persons off it is remarkable. I just wanted to.
There is a question for three of you, but maybe Professor Thompson, you have. Are we right to talk about medical marijuana in the same way that we don't talk about medical opium? We talk about morphine. Do we have to change something about the terminology that we use to really?
I believe it will. Right now we're using the word medicinal because there's still some gray areas and we're a little unsure, and the long-term studies, some of them haven't been done. Clearly we have done the studies to show the safety issues. We know about a small percentage of person with psychosis if they're predisposed to it. We know about some short dependency syndromes, but in terms of the benefits are significant. And I believe that it will become standard use as medical in some regards for specific things, and I see that happening right now. But in terms of the sign-off on it around the World Health Organization and the other international, and of course, Big Pharma, in terms of how is this as a competitor to other medications, I think that these are some of the issues that we'll have to overcome. And I think no sooner or later, you are going to see it, or some aspects of it, being labeled medical, while some is still medicinal, because it will take some time for it to have the full studies done, and so as regards to prove it.
I think it is a misuse of the term. I think it's a bit of a cop-out. But it probably has to be that way now because of the many years of demonization of the plant. So I guess we now have to try, well, it's medical. But really and truly, we should simply be talking about cannabis or whatever word. It's just, it has multifaceted properties. And I'm always, I don't want to be, go a bit off here in terms of, but I often wonder, what is this about recreational? What is recreational marijuana? I have no idea. Because if you take cannabis and you, let us say you suffer from high stress or whatever, and it alleviates your stress, isn't that a sort of a, what is it, what's the word? I'm not a doctor, I'm a lawyer. But it's a medical sort of effect. So from my point of view, there's already this distinction between recreation. The point is, we have to reverse the centuries of demonization and bad press that cannabis got. And yes, we need to be cautious in terms of and not exceed and have excess, as was said before, but these little silos are not necessary. And in time to come, I think that is what will happen. It will be like anything else, and hopefully we get there without many people being exploited or hurt, as the case may be. But really and truly, all of it is so-called medical or medicinal, if you want to put it that way.
One of the issues that I think that the countries are having right now is the banking, the financial. Is that one of the sectors where this reversal of the demonetization has to be?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm happy it was raised in the earlier session, but it is a real issue. It is a challenge for us locally and clearly for things that have been explained and corresponding banking arrangements. Our banks are reluctant, quite frankly, or unable to, maybe reluctant is not the word, unable to treat with proceeds from cannabis. There is a lot of hypocrisy still, quite frankly, around the industry and around the plant. And we have to move past that. You know, I'm heartened when I hear my friend from St. Vincent say they have found a way, and clearly we in Jamaica will look to see if they have opened up a pathway for other countries. The industry has always taken a certain amount of bravery, and Canada has shown some bravery, especially for their positioning in the world. Part of my hope is that they will continue, that they won't, they've gone thus far, and my hope is that recognizing the position that they hold in helping to influence world behavior, I hope they won't back down. And quite frankly, that is in relation to banking, because I do believe that Canada can lead the world in these arrangements, and in relation to exportation and importation, right? The principled stance that Canada has taken in relation to a disregard for some of the conventions locally should be extended, quite frankly, internationally, if we are really to have a solid, thriving medicinal industry. Again, it makes no sense that we're developing some of the world's best medicines in Jamaica that can save lives, and they're needed here in Canada and they cannot access the Canadian market. I think that is something that is part of the conversation that, quite frankly, has to be had. And Canada has gone thus far. My hope is that they will continue to lead the world in that regard.
Do you see Canada as a partner, as a competitor, a rival?
Oh,
I say that the competition between you about who has the best ganja or the
No,
best
no.
is heating up.
I think, let me tell you.
Let me correct that. Let me correct that. Jamaica has always been there, and they have the best. I am now. How I say it? I am sorry. I'm going to say I have not tried it, and I don't try. But I would say some people have told me one or two that they differ with that particular view. But I wouldn't argue with Jamaica in that regard. I want to point that out.
Neutral person from many countries say that their version is the best. So I don't think we can.
But let me make this point. You see, St. Vincent is a volcanic island.
Oh my goodness.
And apparently we're supposed to have 1% of this soil called molic andosol.
No
It's
advertisements
only
here.
1% on the world's surface. And it's supposed to have this high phosphate content. It's very porous, doesn't allow accumulation of water and so forth. It seemed to be ideal for growing cannabis. But I wouldn't use that in any way to promote that St. Vincent the Grenadines is the best.
There are 2 points. One, clearly, I believe in healthy competition. I believe we can get better. right? And I believe when we practice, when we collaborate across countries, look at the various strains that we have, the different growing conditions, we can get better. You know, one of the things that we've been trying to focus our industry on is research. So, you know, about 2 weeks ago, or maybe it would be a month ago, a researcher at the University of the West Indies in Mona, in Kingston, say they have reconstructed the Bob Marley strain, a strain that we thought was long gone. And this was a strain of marijuana that Bob Marley smoked. Now, is that the best? You know, again, even in Jamaica, I'm from St. Elizabeth, and, you know, we argue with Westmoreland, which is another parish, about who has the best. The reality is more and more as we get into testing, as we get into see how it matches, I think what you will find is different strains clearly are better for different things, right? And that's important. The second thing, Canada is a big partner, and that's how we see them. Right now, some of the top firms in Canada and in the Canadian cannabis industry are invested in Jamaica and are big partners in Jamaica and work with us in relation to regulations, in relation to development of the industry, and in relation to best practices. You know, so I think especially where we are now, in the development of the industry, there can be no competition. We're not at that stage yet because there still isn't wide enough scale buy-in that the drug has been removed from the schedule. So we still have to continue to partner, to work together, to collaborate, remembering that there is a bigger objective at play that the Rastafarians have been saying from the get-go, this plant can help. It should never have been criminalized. So the mission is nowhere near complete.
If I may, just to on the point of Canada, our report clearly puts forward a roadmap for the Caribbean. One, for them to work together, and there are 14 plus countries, in promoting the legal reform objective and social reform objective. But more importantly, to ally ourselves with like-minded countries, and Canada is specifically referenced. And actually, it was very interesting. We were finalizing reports, and just like about the next week or so, Canada announced that we're going to, so it was like divine intervention. So we do clearly see Canada as an important partner, ally, and source of inspiration, really. I was in Vienna earlier this year, February, I think it was, with all the missions, with the commissions and whatever. And the purpose is, and with some other NGOs and so on, to try to press the objective to change the scheduling, reclassification of cannabis. And that is beginning to crack. A question was asked earlier about WHO. Of course, yes, the WHO has made some very important pronouncements. And even internally, some of the commissions, they are beginning to review and so on. But it is very important that a country like Canada, which has such a good global reputation, and I would say also a safe one, you know, they're not known to be a radical sort of touting country, work with countries like the Caribbean, where we have so much in common. Yes, we have a really great relationship in trade and great symbiosis in many ways, to really push the agenda forward. So it's not just about industry on a sort of a micro level. There must be a really concerted effort to change the international perspective and dynamic. Otherwise, we'll still be caught up with all these issues of the banking, etc. So I hope that's one thing that comes out clearly from this grouping, that we can have these concrete partnerships to press at that global agenda.
Mm-hmm. And Doctor?
As being at the head of the regulatory authority in St. Vincent and Grenadines, I could understand some of the pains that Health Canada is going through. And the effort they've made, I want to applaud Health Canada in terms of the efforts that they have made. We've looked at the legislation, and to be honest, we've been able to extract certain aspects of it and use it in our own piece of legislation. And we would certainly like to see, in this hemisphere at least, a much closer relationship. And so there is some greater harmonization. We were here recently, and I was pleased to visit a particular site where they're doing outdoor cultivation in Canada. And this is something where there's been a sort of view that you could only do cultivation indoor, under expensive lights and so forth. And clearly the cost of production has to be an important factor. And especially if this is something that is going to be available. So that St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we do indoor, we do greenhouse, and we do have a preponderance of outdoor grow. So it's very pleasing to see that here in Canada there are trials in terms of outdoor grow, and that this is something that can become something of a standard in relation to reducing the total cost of production. And still, it's been done in a safe, efficient fashion that everybody could be compliant with.
And definitely Canada doesn't have that volcanic land that you enjoy.
I'm not sure. Has it been okay? You have the Great Lakes, and so.
In the past, the Caribbean region, your population, your communities have suffered the criminalization of marijuana in Western countries. Now, the attitudes have changed, and countries like Canada, Europe, even some states in the United States are changing that mentality. But do you think that change is permanent? Are you afraid that maybe in a few years there is a complete reversal and you're again being criminalized for something that is?
I absolutely have no fear about that happening. I see the opposite. In fact, my deputy chair is a scientist, well, he's a psychiatrist, but doing research in cannabis in Jamaica and Mona, University of the West Indies, which is my university as well. And he, since Jamaica went ahead, they sort of jumped the gun when we started the commission, which we're glad about now, because we are able to sort of use the information. And he has done, not polls, studies from his patients. And we see that there's been no, like, one of the big things was, mental illnesses and so on. They have not seen an increase. That's one good thing. But also the information we have is that attitudes in Jamaica have actually changed for the better. So although there was a high, acceptance, since the laws have changed, more and more people, in some cases 90-something% of those who support legal reform for cannabis in terms of research, and there are different percentages, 80-something for medical, there's different percentages, but all very high. So it tells us that, and I think Uruguay, when we hear later, we might probably get similar statistics. So it is quite clear that once we have a law reform and once we have responsible regulation and I suppose public education and so on, that people realize that we had taken the wrong approach in the past. And so I don't see that. I don't have any fear. No.
And quickly, for you.
I agree. I think definitely one locally. We have gone too far to go back, and again, some would argue we took too long to go that far. So I think we're past that stage where anybody's looking back. In fact, the discussions now are how do you move forward? Do you go for legalization? There are some aspects of the laws that we have not dealt with as yet, like edibles. I know Canada is moving in that direction, and we never moved in that direction. Those are the conversations we're having now. So the conversations are looking forward. Clearly, I believe also internationally, it's a bit like you start an avalanche, yes? The reality, I believe it will only catch speed, because the more you're able to test, to research, is the more uses you find of the plant. And once that is the case, and the plant is in fact useful and does things that much better than other plants, it stands to reason that it's just when, it's not if, it's just when. So I believe on banking, I believe on export, it's just when. And the bigger question will be, will you be a part of those who lead the change, or will you catch up, right? We started a little late in our context, while we were early in the Caribbean context. But because of what we knew of the plant for so long, people would say in Jamaica that we should have gone that road a long time. People have been asking us to do this a long time. In the Caribbean, we were the first. But now, the bigger question is, can we continue to partner with those who have stepped out as the first countries to lead that change so that more will come on board? I think that's where we are now.
And Professor Thompson, are you also optimistic?
I'll tell you.
We found it's all about education. And you know, when we start off talking about this in lecture, we always start from the premise of the endocannabinoid system that people have never heard of before, that people don't know anything about. And when they find out that there's a reason why cannabinoids or various other elements can have an impact on their body for certain type of things, sleep, appetite, pain, so forth. When they start to understand that, there's a greater appreciation of it. It's remarkable how, I mean, there are many plants that have medicinal properties for cancer, and so how this one has so many properties is just remarkable. And we say the Rastafari were right. They're saying it's the Lord's doing. But I think that there's no turning back. And we're stepping up our whole educational programs. And of course, we got to get it right. The banking compliance, the good agricultural practice, the GMP in terms of good manufacturing production to make sure products are safe and so forth. No, we banned pesticides 2 years ago. We banned Roundup and so forth, and those sort of things in savings ingredients. And we're taking that organic approach. And I think that incrementally, we just have to get things right. And we're willing to learn. And I'm hoping at some point in time I'll be back in Canada, and we're also going to be at CanX in Jamaica.
And I was going to go further. Maybe one of the things that would help to continue the movement is if the second annual conference is held in a nice country called Jamaica.
Well, with that, again, the competition is heating up. Good job. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much, Doctor. It's a pleasure.